Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip into a world where men in long robes hover over flickering flames, their eyes gleaming with hope as they stir bubbling cauldrons filled with strange powders and heavy metals. You can almost smell the acrid smoke and hear the quiet chanting in candlelit chambers, because we're diving into the old obsession of turning metal into gold. It sounds like a video game quest reward, but this was the dream that consumed centuries of thought, countless lives, and more than a few fortunes. And yes, spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this if you try it yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, what's your local time, and where are you listening from tonight? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You picture yourself wandering through narrow medieval streets, the stone walls damp with mist, as rumours buzz like flies around a market stall. Whispers of men who can make gold out of nothing, out of lead, tin, or copper, trickle through the crowd. To your left, a hooded figure carries a satchel that clinks suspiciously with glass vials. To your right, a merchant mutters that his cousin swears he saw silver turned into gold just last week. You can't help but lean closer. Gold was more than just wealth back then. It was immortality pressed into shining metal. Gold didn't tarnish, didn't rust, didn't seem to die. In an age where everything decayed, food spoiled, wood rotted, people aged, gold remained stubbornly perfect. If you held it in your hand, it was like holding eternity. That's why people believed metals might be alive too, like plants in a slow, underground garden. Lead was young and base, they thought, but maybe, with enough care and coaxing, you could ripen it into noble gold. Historians still argue whether the earliest alchemists genuinely believed in literal transmutation, or whether it was always meant as a spiritual metaphor. Either way, you stand there in the market square listening to the gossip, realizing that people in the Middle Ages had a very different relationship to metal. Today, you drop a coin and shrug. Back then, a coin could be the key to heaven, or at least the key to avoiding the tax collector. Step inside a workshop. The air is thick with sulphur. Candles flicker in iron sconces, their wax dripping into little rivers on the stone floor. A man in a wool robe hunches over a crucible, muttering a prayer that sounds suspiciously like a recipe. He adds shavings of lead, then sprinkles in crushed herbs, then dusts the mixture with bright yellow sulphur powder. It sizzles, spits, and nearly smokes him out of the room. He coughs, wipes soot off his nose, and peers down, half convinced he sees flecks of gold shining at the bottom. Of course, you know better, there's no gold here, just a whiff of disappointment and maybe a future lung problem. But for him, hope burns as fiercely as the coals in his furnace. He believes that if he just tweaks the mixture, if he just keeps trying, one day the dull grey metal will transform into eternal brilliance. The quirky part? Some of these recipes called for downright bizarre ingredients. Think crocodile dung, human hair, or blood drawn on certain moon phases. Imagine being the poor assistant sent out with a bucket to collect that. You'd never look at a zoo the same way again. And yet, these oddities were sprinkled into serious texts, carefully copied and illuminated by monks who thought they were preserving the secrets of the universe. You trail your fingers across a manuscript laid open on a wooden desk. The parchment crackles softly under your touch. Strange symbols dance across the page, circles within circles, triangles within squares, letters that look half Greek, half mystical doodle. To the untrained eye, it's gibberish. To the alchemist, it's a treasure map. And to you, it's a reminder that human beings have always loved the idea that there's a hidden layer to reality, a code you can crack if you just squint hard enough. As you lean closer, a thought creeps in. This isn't just about money, it's about power. Kings wanted it to fund wars. Monks wanted it to sanctify their monasteries. Regular folks wanted it because life was short, hard and unfair. And if gold could be coaxed from lead, then maybe the world wasn't as bleak as it seemed. Maybe there was a secret back door to paradise. You hear footsteps echo outside. Someone's coming to check on the progress. The alchemist wipes his hands nervously, hiding the disappointing lump of slag at the bottom of his crucible. He promises results soon. Just a little more funding. Just a little more time. Some things, you realise, never change. Grant proposals back then probably sounded a lot like they do today. The air grows warmer as you linger. Sparks from the furnace drift upward, tiny fireflies in the dark. You realise how dangerous this room is. Flammable herbs stacked in jars, glass vessels so fragile they could explode, mercury shimmering like liquid silver in an open bowl. It's a miracle anyone survived these experiments at all, and yet this is where the dream begins, in smoky rooms and whispered prayers, with the idea that dull matter can be transformed into perfection. You step back into the night, the cool air brushing your face. The city hums quietly, but your ears still ring with the hiss of boiling metals. The dream of gold follows you, shimmering faintly like an after-image when you close your eyes, and you realise you're only at the very beginning of this long, winding pursuit of the impossible. You leave behind the smoky workshops of ordinary alchemists and drift into a world where whispers grow louder, more insistent, circling around a single object of desire, the philosopher's stone. Not an actual stone you could kick down a medieval street, but a mythical substance that promised to unlock the greatest secrets of the universe. If lead could become gold, then the stone was the key to the lock, the password to reality itself. Picture yourself slipping through an old library, shelves sagging under the weight of manuscripts bound in cracked leather. Dust motes swirl like tiny galaxies in the shafts of candlelight. Every text you pass seems to hint at something hidden. Recipes half erased. Diagrams full of geometric shapes and planetary symbols. Phrases in Latin that feel like coded spells. Somewhere in those pages, they swear, is the recipe for the philosopher's stone. You lean closer, trying to read, but the letters blur as if guarding their secrets. The stone was more than a tool for transmuting base metals into gold. According to legend, it could also grant eternal youth and perfect health. Imagine a medieval hype package, instant riches, immortality, and cosmic wisdom all rolled into one red, glowing powder. Not bad for something that probably never existed. Historians still argue whether alchemists truly thought the stone was physical, or whether it was always symbolic, a metaphor for enlightenment, self-perfection, or maybe just an excuse to keep asking for royal funding. Still, belief in it was intoxicating. People spoke of it as if it were just out of reach, like a treasure chest glimpsed underwater. Some alchemists claimed they'd almost made it, swearing they just needed one more ingredient, a pinch of stardust, a rare herb, or mercury distilled under the right astrological sign. Of course. Almost is the universal excuse of dreamers everywhere. You've probably said it yourself. I almost got enough sleep last night, but in their case, the stakes were immortality. One mainstream fact you can't ignore: the hunt for the philosopher's stone influenced real science. Paracelsus, a famous Renaissance physician, dabbled in alchemy while shaping early ideas of chemistry and medicine. He insisted that the body was like a furnace, that sickness came from chemical imbalances, and that remedies could be engineered just like metals in a crucible. You can thank him, in part, for shifting medicine away from bloodletting and toward chemical cures. But the quirky side of this chase is what keeps you smiling in the shadows. Some recipes for the stone involved questionable ingredients, eggshells soaked in vinegar, dew collected at dawn, or my personal favourite, the ashes of a perfectly black crow, roasted at midnight. Picture the poor assistant chasing a crow through a village square while villagers look on, wondering if this is science or some kind of absurd street theatre. The promise of immortality also meant rulers were deeply invested. Kings, dukes, Even popes gave gold, land, and protection to alchemists who claimed they could deliver. You can imagine sitting at a royal banquet, silver platters heaped with roasted meat, as an alchemist leans across the table and whispers that he's this close to creating the philosopher's stone. The king's eyes gleam with greed, while courtiers mutter about fraud. You quietly sip your wine, knowing full well this will probably end in either disappointment or execution. The obsession stretched across cultures. In Europe, it was the philosopher's stone. In China, similar legends spoke of the elixir of immortality. Both pursued the dream that humans could somehow cheat decay, bending nature's rules for their own survival. You can't help but smirk. People didn't even have decent plumbing, but they were convinced they could conquer death. It's a little like trying to fix a broken smartphone screen with duct tape and then announcing you'll build a spaceship. Still, there's something strangely moving about their stubbornness. They believed the universe was alive, full of secret correspondences, planets connected to metals, seasons tied to humours, symbols unlocking hidden truths, and they believed, fervently, that humans had the ability to decode it all. Maybe that's what the stone really symbolised. Not just gold, but the idea that the world's mysteries were solvable if you kept looking hard enough. As you wander deeper into the imagined library, the air grows heavier and the manuscripts feel almost alive under your fingertips. A page flutters open by itself, revealing a red circle drawn inside a triangle, with the word Lapis Philosophorum scrawled beside it. The Philosopher's Stone? You trace the symbol lightly, half expecting the page to warm under your touch. But then you pause. Isn't this what every treasure hunt feels like? A shimmer on the horizon, just far enough to keep you walking. Whether it was gold or eternal life, the Philosopher's Stone dangled just out of reach for centuries, and people never stopped chasing. And you? You close the book gently, realizing that the hunt for impossible perfection is the most human story of all. You leave the dusty libraries behind and drift into cool stone corridors, where the air smells faintly of candle wax and damp stone. The silence is broken only by the muffled chanting of monks. Their lives revolve around prayer, discipline, and, surprisingly, alchemy. You might think cloistered men in robes spent their days copying scripture and avoiding worldly temptations. But many monasteries also preserved, studied, and tinkered with the strange art of turning metals into gold. Picture yourself walking slowly down a hallway lit by narrow slits of daylight. You push open a heavy wooden door and find a small chamber that looks half chapel, half laboratory. An altar holds both a crucifix and a mortar and pestle. Shelves lined with jars contain dried herbs, powders, and metallic shavings. The monk in front of you wears a brown robe dusted with flowery residue, as if he's been baking, but instead of bread, he's grinding copper and sulphur together while humming a hymn. This blending of the sacred and the experimental wasn't accidental. Medieval monasteries were some of the safest places to keep knowledge alive during chaotic centuries. When wars raged or kingdoms fell, manuscripts survived in cloisters. That's how a lot of alchemical texts were preserved, alongside scripture, herbal remedies, and astronomical charts. Historians still argue whether the monks truly saw no conflict between alchemy and faith, or whether they carefully hid their pursuits behind metaphors so they wouldn't get accused of heresy. And yet, you notice something charmingly quirky here. Many recipes read like liturgical instructions. Fast for 3 days, pray at dawn, light the furnace on a Sunday. It's as if the universe itself could be persuaded into transformation if approached with the right mixture of chemistry and reverence. Imagine a monk saying grace not over bread and wine, but over a bubbling crucible. It's equal parts holy ritual and hazardous experiment. You sit down on a wooden bench and watch the monk at work. He sprinkles a white powder into a glass vessel and mutters a psalm. The mixture hisses, sending up a curl of smoke that drifts toward the vaulted ceiling. He doesn't flinch. For him, the smoke is a sign, maybe even a blessing, that the transformation is underway. You might laugh and think, that's just sulfur reacting, but to him, it's the whisper of creation itself. The mainstream fact to ground you, monasteries didn't just dabble in esoteric dreams, they produced practical knowledge, brewing beer, distilling medicinal tonics, experimenting with dyes and metallurgy, all were everyday practices. Alchemy overlapped with these. A monk trying to create gold might accidentally discover how to produce a stronger tincture for healing wounds, or a new pigment for illuminated manuscripts. That's how trial and error slowly built up the foundations of real science. The fringe side, though, veers into the mystical. Some monks wrote that the transformation of base metals into gold was really an allegory for the transformation of the soul, purifying sin into divine grace. The furnace was your body, the lead was your flawed spirit, the philosopher's stone was Christ himself, perfect and eternal, depending on how cynical you are. That either sounds deeply poetic or like a clever way to avoid getting accused of wasting monastery funds on failed experiments. And of course, a little humour sneaks in if you imagine the practical side. Picture a monk explaining to his abbot why half the monastery's copper has vanished. Ah, yes, Brother Matthew used it all in the name of spiritual growth. Meanwhile, Brother Matthew is in the cellar, frantically stirring bubbling goo and hoping the abbot doesn't notice the scorch marks on the wall. You press your palm to the cold stone of the wall. The vibrations from the chanting in the chapel above seem to echo through your hand. For the monks, there was no hard line between heaven and earth, between chemistry and prayer. It was all one quest, to understand creation, to bring order out of chaos, to inch a little closer to God. Maybe gold was just a bonus. Still, you feel the tension. Outside these walls, rumours swirl. To some, alchemy reeks of fraud and sorcery. A monk caught mixing strange powders might be praised as a wise scholar, or denounced as a heretic. That uncertainty adds a quiet intensity to the scene. The monk works quickly but carefully, as if the walls themselves are listening. You lean closer to the bench, and the flickering candlelight makes the crucifix on the wall shimmer as though glowing with approval. Or maybe it's just your tired eyes. Either way, you realise how deeply human this pursuit was, a mix of faith, hope, desperation, and curiosity, all poured into smoky crucibles in hidden rooms. As you step back into the cloister, the chanting grows louder again. You pass rows of monks bent over manuscripts, their quills scratching faintly. Some are copying scripture, others quietly sketching diagrams of furnaces and vessels into the margins. Knowledge and devotion, side by side, inked onto parchment for whoever might come next. The night air outside feels cool and damp. You pause, look back at the monastery's glowing windows, and realise the truth. Without monks, mystics, and metals, much of this golden dream would have burned away. Instead, it was kept alive, flickering softly like candlelight in the dark. You drift further east, carried on the smoke of those monastic furnaces, until the scent changes. Less incense, more spice, less candle wax, more hot sand and crushed herbs. The air shimmers with heat as you arrive in the bustling cities of the Abbasid Caliphate, where the hum of trade and scholarship never seems to stop. Baghdad in the 9th century is your destination, and it feels like stepping into a hive of ideas. Markets spill over with silk and saffron. Scholars debate under shaded arches, and tucked away in laboratories, men bend over crucibles, just as obsessed with transmutation as their European counterparts. Here, the very word alchemy takes its shape. From the Arabic alchimia, which itself traces back to Greek roots, comes the vocabulary that will fuel centuries of dreams. You watch scribes dip their pens into ink and carefully copy texts, mixing the wisdom of Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions with their own experiments. The result is a blend of practical chemistry, philosophy, and mysticism. Picture yourself in a small laboratory. Clay jars line the walls, each labelled in curling Arabic script. A scholar in a long robe adjusts the flame under a glass vessel, his hands steady as a surgeon's. The mixture inside bubbles with quiet menace. He tilts his head, listening, as though the vessel might whisper its secrets. On the desk nearby, another vessel cools in the shade, its surface covered in thin, crystalline deposits that sparkle faintly. The mainstream fact to ground you. One of the most famous figures here is Jabir ibn Hayyan, often Latinized as Geber. He's considered by many the father of chemistry. Historians still argue whether the hundreds of works attributed to him were truly his or later followers writing under his name. But the legacy is undeniable. Jabir's writings systematized experimentation, describing distillation, crystallization, and sublimation in ways that laid the foundation for modern laboratory science. Even if he still dreamed of transmuting metals, he also catalogued acids, salts, and techniques that chemists still recognize today. But the quirky, fringe side of his legacy is no less fascinating. Some texts claim Jabir insisted that metals had souls, and that the secret to transformation was adjusting their internal balance of qualities like hot, cold, moist, and dry. Imagine him scribbling furiously, trying to calculate how much sulphurous soul heat a lump of lead needed to ripen into gold. It's like a cosmic cooking recipe. Add 1 pinch of heat, stir in dryness, and voila, eternity in metallic form. You linger in the laboratory as the scholar raises a flask and peers at it against the light. He murmurs something about the philosopher's stone, here often imagined as a red powder. His assistant scribbles notes quickly, while glancing nervously at the bubbling pot that looks a little too lively. You half expect it to explode, but the scholar seems unconcerned. To him, this is controlled chaos, creation in miniature. Outside the lab, Baghdad's House of Wisdom hums with translation projects. Greek texts like Aristotle and Galen are rendered into Arabic, absorbed, debated, and sometimes corrected. Knowledge doesn't just travel, it transforms. Alchemy, too, evolves here. Not just mystical speculation, but hands-on discipline. You can almost hear the clash of ideas in the courtyards. Philosophers arguing whether metals are born in the womb of the earth. Merchants wondering if alchemy could stabilize currency. Mystics insisting the quest is really about the soul. And humour sneaks in even here. Picture a scholar telling his patron, "Yes, I can definitely make gold, but first I need more funding for glassware." Some things never change. Scientific grant proposals are eternal. Or imagine the assistants tasked with collecting odd ingredients, camel urine at dawn, desert herbs after a sandstorm. You wouldn't envy that grocery list. Still, the seriousness is undeniable. Without these Arab scholars, Europe would never have rediscovered Aristotle, Galen, or even alchemy itself. The manuscripts copied and expanded here would flow back into Europe centuries later, sparking the Renaissance and giving alchemists new fuel for their fires. You step back into the street, where the call to prayer rises above the city. The sun sets in deep orange, turning the domes golden, and for a moment you realise that even if they never succeeded in making literal gold, the scholars of the Abbasid world forged something even rarer, bridges of knowledge that still shine today. The desert heat fades behind you as you drift further east, until the air thickens with incense and the steady rhythm of drums. Lantern light flickers across lacquered wood and painted scrolls. You've stepped into ancient China, where emperors crave not only gold, but something even more audacious: immortality. The dream here doesn't centre on crucibles of molten metal so much as cauldrons of bubbling elixirs. Instead of shaping lead into gold, Chinese alchemists chase liquid formulas they believe will keep emperors young forever. You find yourself in a palace courtyard at dusk. The emperor sits beneath a canopy embroidered with dragons, his eyes tired but sharp, while court alchemists bow low before him. They hold small porcelain bottles with trembling hands, each claiming the liquid inside holds the secret to eternal life. You lean closer, half expecting to smell honey or herbs, but instead the sharp tang of mercury and cinnabar stings your nose. Already, you know this story isn't going to end well. Here's the mainstream fact. Chinese alchemy developed around the pursuit of Jian, immortality and transcendence. The imperial court sponsored alchemists to brew potions from minerals, especially cinnabar, mercury sulfide, which could be refined into liquid mercury. To the alchemists, mercury shimmered with eternal vitality, always flowing, never corroding. To modern eyes, it shimmered with poison. Historians still argue whether the alchemists genuinely believed their potions worked, or whether they knowingly gambled with deadly substances, hoping their patrons wouldn't notice the difference until it was too late. Quirky tidbit. Several Chinese emperors probably died from these elixirs. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, is said to have consumed mercury pills in his desperate bid for immortality, only to poison himself slowly. Later dynasties repeated the mistake, as if each ruler thought, "Sure, it killed the last guy, but maybe this batch is the good one." It's like watching history's longest-running bad product review. You follow an alchemist into his hidden workshop. The room glows with the red dust of cinnabar ground fine on a stone slab. Jars of jade powder, gold flakes, and rare herbs crowd the shelves. He carefully stirs a potion, muttering Taoist chants, believing that the harmony of cosmic forces, the yin and yang, will settle into the mixture and grant immortality. The furnace glows like a miniature sun, and the bubbling brew hisses softly, as if alive. The philosophical side of this chase is equally fascinating. For Taoist alchemists, external elixirs were only one half of the puzzle. There was also internal alchemy, meditative practices designed to refine the spirit, circulate energy, and extend life from within. Some scholars suggest that the dangerous potions may have been an outer metaphor for inner transformation, but tell that to the poor emperors who keeled over after sipping liquid mercury. And here's a detail to make you smile. Court records describe some emperors demanding daily doses of immortality wine. Imagine being the royal sommelier, nervously pouring goblets of bright red cinnabar-infused liquid, while silently thinking, "Sire, this is definitely going to kill you." You would not want that job. The wider culture, though, embraced the dream. Mountains were dotted with Taoist hermits experimenting with elixirs. Markets sold longevity pills alongside herbs and spices. Poets even wrote about the shimmer of cinnabar as if it contained the secrets of the stars. To live forever wasn't just an emperor's wish, it was a national fascination. As you walk through a moonlit garden, you can almost hear the clink of porcelain cups, the soft gulp of emperors chasing eternity, and the nervous sighs of their servants. You wonder how much of the belief was genuine hope, and how much was the irresistible lure of control over death itself. The garden grows quiet. The fragrance of plum blossoms mingles with the metallic tang of mercury. You look up at the night sky, the stars burning steadily above, and realize the irony. The emperors, desperate to live forever, are long gone, but their dream, written in poems, etched in scrolls, preserved in legend, lives on, shimmering faintly, like the dangerous glow of cinnabar dust under a lantern's flame. You drift deeper into the glow of lamplight, where a small dish of quicksilver glistens like liquid moonlight. Ancient alchemists believed this shimmering metal was alive in some mysterious way, able to move and merge with other substances, perhaps even carrying the secret of transformation itself. You picture trembling hands holding tiny vials, tilting them to watch the droplets roll and fuse, silver globes chasing one another like playful spirits. But behind the shimmer lurked danger. Mercury was alluring, but it poisoned those who touched it, seeping into their breath, their skin, their very thoughts. Some alchemists slowly sickened without knowing why. their dreams of gold purchased with their health. Still, the glow was irresistible. You hear the soft clink of glass, the muffled hiss of furnaces, and the hypnotic swirl of quicksilver promising a gateway to hidden power. The shimmer dances in your mind as you float away, realizing how beauty and peril were always intertwined in the pursuit of alchemy's deepest mysteries. You find yourself in a candlelit hall, where nobles and kings lean forward, hungry for secrets whispered by men in long robes. Alchemists, both true seekers and clever tricksters, promised rivers of gold and elixirs of eternal youth. Some dazzled their patrons with glittering powders and smoke-filled illusions, while others believed deeply in their craft, convinced they were on the edge of discovery. You imagine a duke sliding a purse of coins across a polished table, his eyes fixed on the alchemist's strange flasks and parchments. Sometimes faith was rewarded with beautiful glassware and curious experiments. More often, the promises dissolved like smoke, leaving only disappointment. Yet still, rulers returned again and again, for the dream of gold was too sweet to abandon. You hear laughter mixed with suspicion, the faint sound of goblets clinking, the rustle of velvet sleeves. In those moments, the line between wisdom and fraud blurred, and history carried both forward together, tangled in mystery. You're slipping into the musty chambers of a 17th century scholar, and the air smells not of apples or fresh ink, but of scorched metals, candle wax, and the faint tang of mercury. Yes, it's Isaac Newton, sure. You remember him from school as the apple-bonked genius who invented calculus, outlined gravity, and pretty much rewrote physics. But tonight you're leaning over his shoulder at 2 a.m, and the pages in front of him are not filled with equations of motion. They're covered in cramped handwriting about crucibles, transmutations, and a strange glowing stone. Newton kept secret notebooks on alchemy, and they're not exactly bedtime doodles. He copied ancient recipes line by line, often in code or Latin shorthand, as if worried a nosy neighbour might borrow sugar and accidentally stumble into instructions for summoning molten chaos. One page describes purifying green lion substances, another scribbles out ways to capture the elusive sophic mercury. You'd think he was plotting the world's most confusing cocktail. Historians still argue whether Newton truly believed he could turn lead into gold, or whether he saw alchemy as a metaphor, something symbolic, spiritual, more than literal metal hacking. Yet here's the wild thing. Newton spent more time on alchemy than on optics. That rainbow-splitting prism you saw in every science textbook. Side project. His main desk hours were filled with smoky experiments, powders fizzing, crucibles cracking. Imagine the father of modern science in a stained robe, poking around like a kid trying out TikTok life hacks, except his hacks could poison him. Mercury was everywhere in his lab, shimmering like quicksilver, sneaking into his bloodstream, and probably making him twitchy, obsessive, and maybe a little paranoid. You don't exactly picture Newton humming happily in the garden, more like muttering about philosophic fire while forgetting to eat dinner. Mainstream history remembers his Principia, that grand Latin volume that laid out the clockwork of the cosmos. But tucked in library archives are his secret manuscripts, pages browned, edges flaking, where he wondered if metals could breed like animals, if sunlight could hatch new forms, if the philosopher's stone was more than legend. Quirky detail. Newton even bought an old alchemist's furnace at an auction, hauling the soot-stained contraption back to Cambridge like a prized antique espresso machine. And yes, he tried it out. You picture the scene, the room glowing red from embers, shadows stretching long, and Newton whispering to himself as he peers into bubbling mixtures. A modern chemist would shake their head at the superstition. But Newton's blend of rational law and mystical curiosity is what made him so unique. The man who explained tides also wrote about the apocalypse. The scientist who tamed calculus also scribbled notes about purifying the soul through fire. And here's your little reality check. If you'd wandered into Newton's lab, you probably wouldn't survive it. Mercury vapours alone could knock you out faster than your Wi-Fi cutting during a Netflix binge. Yet, strangely enough, this secretive obsession shaped the very tools and methods of modern chemistry. He catalogued, he measured, he experimented with careful precision, even when the goal itself, making gold, remained forever out of reach. So, as you drift beside him, you notice the flick of candlelight across his weary face. His quill scratches faster, ink smudges across his knuckles. He's convinced that nature hides its truths in riddles, and if he can just decode them, the universe will reveal not only gravity, but also transformation, immortality, and maybe even the divine blueprint itself. You can't help but smile. The world's most celebrated scientist, sweating over a recipe that calls for dragon's blood, like some medieval cookbook left on the wrong shelf. You settle deeper into your pillow as the smoke clears, because by the late 17th and 18th centuries, the dream of transmuting lead into gold begins to fizzle, replaced by something sturdier, chemistry as we know it. You find yourself in a laboratory that actually looks less like a wizard's cave and more like an orderly workshop. Glass vessels are lined up neatly. Balances stand ready to weigh powders with maddening precision, and instead of muttered prayers, you hear the careful scratch of notebooks where every observation is logged. Here's the mainstream fact. This is the age when men like Robert Boyle and later Antoine Lavoisier flipped the script. Boyle, in his 1661 book The Skeptical Chymist, flat out questioned the old Aristotelian elements, earth, air, fire, water, and demanded experiments instead of allegories. You can almost see him wagging a finger at centuries of mystical talk, saying, "Enough with the green lion, let's measure some gas." That moment is a milestone, the birth of real chemistry, moving away from the secret codes of alchemy into open, testable science. Still, the quirky part, Boyle himself dabbled in alchemy, quietly wondering if transmutation might still be possible. It's like a world-class chef sneaking instant noodles when nobody's watching. The transition wasn't a clean break, it was messy, gradual, and flavoured with contradiction. Even Lavoisier, famous for carefully naming oxygen and hydrogen, married into money partly earned from a tax job that made him unpopular. Historians still argue whether the guillotine that claimed him during the French Revolution was punishment for his political role, or for being the face of rational science in a super-irrational time. You hear the faint hiss of gas through tubes, the bubbling of acids in beakers, and the delicate ping as a balance tips. The atmosphere is different from Newton's smoky secrecy. Now you're standing in rooms where ideas are published, debated, repeated. Knowledge spreads like wildfire because suddenly it's not a private treasure to guard, but a communal puzzle to solve. Of course, don't imagine these new chemists as perfectly rational lab coats. They still wore powdered wigs, still argued with dramatic flair, and occasionally set their sleeves on fire. A favourite classroom experiment was dropping metal into acid just to see the impressive fizz, like the 18th century version of a science TikTok prank. People were endlessly delighted by gases that extinguished candles or made voices squeak when inhaled. Think of it as the moment when science found its showmanship, equal parts discovery and circus. And through this, you sense the old dream still clinging like smoke. Was gold truly beyond reach? Boyle hinted at it in private. Lavoisier measured with ruthless care but surely knew the legends. You realise that chemistry didn't erase alchemy. It just absorbed its curiosity and shed the costumes. What remained was the discipline of method, experiment, replication. As the century turns, you watch apprentices replace old alchemical symbols with neat chemical equations, trading the philosopher's stone for the periodic foundations of modern science. But the echo of gold dreams lingers, reminding you how much of progress comes not from discarding fantasy, but from transforming it. One era's failed magic is the next era's method. And if you lean closer to the benches, The faint metallic scent of copper mixing with acid tingles your nose. You realize this is the bridge between mysticism and modernity, between midnight secrecy and daylight laboratories. Somewhere behind the glass and powders, the story of turning lead into gold has not ended. It has only reshaped itself into something we can actually test, teach, and, yes, still sometimes set on fire for fun. You tilt your head back and picture the night sky cracking open with thunder, the kind of storm that rattles your windows and makes you consider unplugging your laptop. Now imagine 18th and 19th century scientists staring at that same lightning and whispering, "Maybe this is the key to gold." You can almost hear the crackle in their voices as they wonder if raw electricity, freshly bottled by Benjamin Franklin's kite or Alessandro Volta's newfangled battery, might succeed where centuries of crucibles had failed. It sounds ridiculous, right? Yet there's your mainstream fact. By the early 1800s, chemists had already split water into hydrogen and oxygen using electricity. They'd seen this invisible force break apart substances that had seemed eternal. So why not metals? If you can shatter water with a spark, maybe you can reknit lead into gold with a thunderbolt. This was the logic, part science, part wishful thinking, that fueled whole generations of electrical experiments. The quirky tidbit. Some inventors really did try to bottle storms, building giant metal rigs on hillsides and hoping a lightning strike would magically rearrange atoms. Others cooked up elaborate contraptions that looked like carnival rides crossed with Frankenstein's lab, wiring up chunks of lead, zapping them with arcs of blue current, and squinting hopefully at the dull metal surface. One even swore he saw flecks of gold appear, though under candlelight. Almost anything can look golden if you want it badly enough. Historians still argue whether these so-called lightning transmutations were honest mistakes born of optimism or outright charlatan tricks staged to impress gullible investors. It didn't help that electricity was so new, so mysterious, that you could claim almost anything and still sound credible. To most audiences, lightning was divine fire captured in a bottle. Of course someone would believe it could hatch gold. Picture yourself standing in one of those gloomy workshops. Copper wires snake across the floor, glass jars filled with acid line the benches, and in the corner, a crude lightning rod hums faintly with charge. You can hear the sizzling snap as a spark leaps from one terminal to another, leaving a sharp smell of ozone that tickles your nose. The alchemist turned electrical experimenter leans in with wild eyes, muttering about Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. You step back because you've seen enough movies to know where this goes. Spoiler, the monster doesn't rise, and the lead stubbornly remains lead. Still, pause for a moment. Electricity really did open doors, though not the golden one they hoped. By shocking metals, chemists discovered electroplating, the art of coating one metal with another, which gave jewellery and coins their dazzling finish. They figured out electrolysis, the key to isolating elements like sodium and potassium, and in the end, those failed thunder and lightning gold schemes nudged science further along the path to actual atomic theory. It's kind of funny, lying here listening, how humans always reach for the flashiest button. If fire didn't do it, maybe lightning will. If lightning fails, maybe radiation. You're sensing the pattern. We never stop poking nature with its own toys, hoping to coax a jackpot. And while no storm ever spat out bullion, the crackle of electricity gave us new tools, new ideas, and a new kind of laboratory magic. So next time thunder rattles your ceiling and lightning streaks the horizon, you might smirk, remembering that once upon a time, people didn't just count the seconds between flash and boom. They dreamed it might turn lead into gold. And honestly, you can't fault them. If you'd been holding a shiny brass key and someone promised that a thunderbolt could turn it solid gold, you'd probably raise your kite string too. You slip into the 19th century and it greets you with bangs. Steam hisses from engines, factory chimneys belch, and laboratories smell of soot, nitric acid, and the faint ozone of static. Where earlier alchemists coaxed transformations with patient heat and ritual, this generation is more likely to try a shove, more spark, a hotter flash, a clever gadget that promises to shortcut time. Experimentation here often reads like a circus act retold by an engineer, equal parts demonstration, dare, and danger. You stand in a gaslit parlour while a visiting amateur chemist promises a spectacle that will make your hair stand up. Sometimes he means that figuratively. A concrete mainstream fact steadies the scene. Alfred Nobel's work in the 1860s to stabilise nitroglycerin, absorbing the volatile liquid into kieselguhr to make dynamite, revolutionised mining, tunnelling, and civil engineering. Christian Friedrich Schönbein's mid-century discovery of nitrocellulose, gun cotton, similarly reshaped propellants and industrial chemistry. These advances were not mere curiosities. They remade landscapes, accelerated commerce, and turned the once improbable into routine engineering feats. The same chemistry that blasted tunnels through mountains also complicated the ethical ledger of the age. In many workshops, the air prickles with sharp smells and the faint pop of small charges. Bottles in looping script line the benches, nitrocellulose, fulminate, nitroglycerin, and public lectures become a hybrid of pedagogy and performance. An eager lecturer mixes reagents, conjures coloured flames, and ends with a dramatic pop that gets the crowd laughing and clapping. That applause draws two classes of people: meticulous experimenters trying to quantify nature, and showmen hungry for headlines. When demonstration becomes theatre, curiosity and spectacle begin to feed one another, and sometimes one of them eats the chandelier. You also notice the fringe pressing close to the bench. Some experimenters reason that if thunder and lightning seem to rearrange nature, then sudden shock or detonation might forcibly nudge a metal into nobility faster than patient heating ever could. So they seal a metal sample in an iron chamber, detonate a charge, and rifle through the slag afterward for any glint of something finer. It's a desperate improvisation. When crucibles and patient method fail to deliver, why not try the fireworks approach? The impulse is recognisably human, impatient, audacious, and a little noisy. Those trials yield moments both comic and sorrowful. An assistant nicknamed Singe earns his moniker after a miscalibrated cartridge curls his eyelashes. Someone jokes his eyebrows are now aerodynamic. At a fashionable salon, a demonstrator's miniature cannon melts a chandelier and sends the hostess into a faint so theatrical it will be whispered about for weeks. These anecdotes give the past a human tilt. People making mistakes, laughing, inventing nicknames. But the laughter sits beside uglier stories. Workshops gutted by blasts, families devastated by factory accidents, and whole neighbourhoods scarred by the sudden violence of an experiment gone wrong. Necessity does breed invention. The hazards of volatile materials force chemists and engineers to devise safer practices, methods to purify nitroglycerin, tests to measure fulminate's sensitivity to friction or heat, and techniques to stabilise liquids into transportable solids. Nobel's kieselguhr trick is the famous solution, but countless smaller innovations, predictable fuses, improved packing, regulated storage, emerge from painful iteration. Those practical lessons feed building codes, insurance models, and industrial protocols that persist into modern engineering. The century learns how to manage explosive power because it has to. Of course, the same appetite for spectacle breeds charlatans. Miracle powders and instant niter are hawked to investors who want quick fortunes. Some promoters stage transmutation claims, planting gold leaf in crucibles, or manipulating lighting so slag glints like bullion, eroding public trust and forcing sober scientists to spend time refuting nonsense. Satirists lampoon the fraudsters in cartoons. Journals run careful rebuttals. Historians still argue whether some celebrated transmutation claims were honest experimental anomalies or deliberate frauds, and the debate sharpens how scientific credibility is earned and defended. There's continuity with the earlier chapters of this story. Remember Newton's soot-stained notebooks and the mercury that once shimmered like temptation. Explosive chemistry is simply another node on the same human thread, an urge to force nature's secrets into the light. Monks used prayer and patience. Alchemists used symbols and slow fire. 19th century experimenters used pressure, percussion, and spectacle. The methods evolve, but the dream of transformation persists. Quirky footnotes make the era feel intimate. Enthusiasts sometimes reported tiny specks they insisted were evidence of transmutation after a blast. One eccentric proposes detonating samples under precisely controlled atmospheres to mature base metals into nobler ones, a claim that reads now as experimental folly, but then read as ingenious improvisation. You can almost see them calibrating jars and arguing about wind direction, while the rest of the town bets whether anyone will get their eyebrows singed. You step back out into the gaslit street and the echoes of those bangs trail behind you. The 19th century loved its explosions because they literally opened the world. Railways, canals, mines. Yet those same bangs revealed the social cost of rapid technological change, accidents, displaced communities, and ethical dilemmas about the uses of power. Historians still argue whether the era's explosive zeal advanced science fast enough to justify its human toll. Either way, the ringing experiments ripple forward into armories and tunnels, and the laboratories that will one day turn to the atom. Tonight, fold that noisy past into your thoughts, along with soot, manuscripts, and mercury shimmer. Keep the image of singed eyebrows and melted chandeliers beside the quieter images of patient laboratories. Both belong to the same story. The 19th century's explosive experiments were reckless and ingenious, absurd and consequential, and they helped light the path toward the even stranger transformations that follow. You find yourself standing in a dim laboratory at the turn of the 20th century, and the air hums with a strange quiet, as if even the dust motes are paying attention. The glassware is familiar, beakers, flasks, balances. But now something invisible thrums through it all. Rays. They call them. Invisible beams that seem to pour out of certain stones, glowing faintly in the dark like embers that never die. You lean closer, and your skin prickles as if a secret is brushing against it. The mainstream fact comes first. Henri Becquerel, in 1896, accidentally discovered radioactivity when he left uranium salts on photographic plates wrapped in black paper. To his surprise, the plates fogged as if they had been exposed to light. What he had stumbled on was radiation, an unseen power flowing from matter itself. Marie and Pierre Curie took this mystery further, labouring in cold sheds to isolate polonium and radium, naming one after Poland, one glowing faintly in their glass tubes like bottled starlight. They won Nobel Prizes for their persistence, and the world leaned in with awe. But the quirky detail, in those early years, nobody quite grasped the danger. People bought radium tonics, painted glowing watch dials, and even soaked in radium baths, convinced the shimmer of radioactive rays could heal arthritis, brighten the skin, and extend youth. Some drank liquid sunshine bottled by smooth-talking salesmen. A few wealthy eccentrics literally slept with radium under their pillows, dreaming they were absorbing cosmic vitality. It sounds absurd now, but in that moment it felt like holding a piece of the philosopher's stone at last. Historians still argue whether the Curies themselves ever suspected the full danger. Their lab notebooks, to this day, remain too radioactive to handle safely, pages infused with the very glow they chased. Did they know they were courting danger, or did devotion to discovery blind them? The debate lingers, like the faint radiation clinging to their old glassware. You imagine yourself drifting through those laboratories. Shadows of the Curies bend over steaming vats of pitch-blende ore. Their hands raw from acids, their faces pale in lamplight. Every so often, a fragment of radium salt glimmers like a captured star. and exhaustion gives way to wonder. Outside, the world whispers of magic, of healing rays, of a future where sickness and even aging might be banished by this newfound fire. And in that moment, it's easy to see why so many believe they were at the cusp of alchemy fulfilled. Here, finally, was proof that matter itself could transform, releasing energy untold, reshaping itself at the core. The alchemist's dream of turning lead into gold suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. If stones could burn without flame, if atoms could split and shimmer, maybe transmutation wasn't myth after all. It was waiting, just under the skin of the universe. As you linger, the silence grows softer, the hum of unseen rays blending with your own slowing breath. It is dangerous, yes, but also strangely calming, like sleeping near a campfire that will never go out. You realize that these radioactive rays were both promise and peril, dream and nightmare, and their glow still flickers across the century that followed. You're floating now into the laboratories of the 20th century, and suddenly the crackling of electricity and the hiss of acids are replaced by a low industrial hum. Massive machines fill the space, hulking particle accelerators, magnets taller than houses, coils wrapped like sleeping serpents. This isn't a monk's cell or Newton's attic anymore. It's the age of physics turned into engineering, an age where humanity no longer just heated, hammered, or zapped metal. Now you're smashing atoms apart, breaking the very bricks of matter itself. The mainstream fact is clear. In 1919, Ernest Rutherford bombarded nitrogen with alpha particles and knocked loose a proton, essentially changing one element into another. It was the first artificial transmutation, not a dream but a real, recorded event. And by the 1930s, accelerators could fire protons, neutrons, or other particles into nuclei, shuffling atoms like cards in a cosmic deck. Alchemy was no longer about metaphors. It was about physics. And yes, quirky detail time. In 1941, scientists at Berkeley actually managed to turn bismuth into gold by bombarding it with high-energy neutrons. Real gold, measurable on a spectrometer. The catch? The amount was microscopic, so small you'd need a jeweler's loupe to spot it, and the cost of the machine time was astronomically higher than the price of a bar of bullion. Still, imagine the grin of the physicist holding a vial and announcing, "Well, we did it." For a moment, the philosopher's stone had been built, not in a furnace, but in a particle accelerator. Historians still argue whether that achievement should count as the fulfillment of the alchemist's dream. On one hand, yes, it was transmutation, one element into another, proven beyond doubt. On the other, it was so impractical that it might as well have been magic. No empire could finance a treasury of gold this way. The energy costs alone could bankrupt nations. The irony is delicious. You can make gold, but you'd spend a fortune doing it. The dream had come true just in time to be useless. Picture yourself walking the concrete halls of those mid-century labs. The air is cool, tinged with ozone. Giant control panels blink with lights, switches clack, and a soft roar of vacuum pumps surrounds you. At the centre, a target foil of dull metal waits as invisible projectiles scream toward it at near-light speed. You know the violence is happening on a scale too small for the eye, but your skin prickles anyway. This is no candlelit trick. This is humanity poking the nucleus itself, rearranging nature's deck chairs with brute force and elegance combined. And of course, you hear echoes of danger in the background. The same machines that could make a speck of gold also made radioactive isotopes, some vital for medicine, others terrifying in weaponry. By mid-century, the dream of transmutation had been fulfilled, but the genie that came out of the bottle looked nothing like a kindly alchemist. Instead of golden coins, it gave mushroom clouds. Instead of immortality, it gave fallout. You breathe slowly as you watch a technician peer into a scope, recording the faintest glimmer of transformed atoms. It's humbling, isn't it? Thousands of years of dreamers chasing the impossible, and here it is at last, real and humming, but bittersweet. The philosopher's stone, hiding not in herbs or mercury, but in neutron beams and nuclear equations. You let the hum fade into your imagination, a reminder that sometimes humanity really does get what it wished for, and discovers the wish was more complicated than anyone guessed. Close your eyes and imagine a world where gold could truly be made in laboratories. Economists often wonder, if alchemy had succeeded, what would have happened? Perhaps kingdoms would have collapsed under floods of cheap treasure. Coins once worth a fortune might have lost their shine, their value vanishing like mist in the sun. The dream of endless wealth was always shadowed by a paradox. The more gold you create, the less precious it becomes. As you drift, picture a market square where merchants exchange goods, their scales tipping with glimmering coins. At first, excitement runs through the crowd, but then whispers grow. Gold is everywhere. And suddenly bread or wool becomes more valuable than metal. The impossible dream of the alchemist carries within it a warning. Some treasures lose meaning if they are no longer rare. Now the candles in the workshop fade, the crucibles cool, and the whispers of ancient seekers dissolve into quiet night. You have walked alongside alchemists, scientists, kings, and dreamers, each chasing mysteries of transformation. Their hopes linger like stardust, soft and weightless, carrying you toward rest. Good night, traveller. May your dreams shimmer gently, like gold hidden in the dark.